Before I introduce our keynote conversation this evening, I do want to take a moment to say a few thanks. First of all, I want to thank J Street's national leaders. Our new board chair, Alex Stanton, who is an incredible and wonderful friend and leader. I want to thank Steve and Pilar Crespi-Robert, who are incredible honorees, deserving of every bit of the honor that you receive tonight for the work that you do and the values that you stand for. Thank you for your powerful speech and for your leadership on these issues. Nancy Richmond and Michael Young, where are you? You have been the chairs of our conference. Woo! Speaker Pelosi, that was an incredibly moving story that you told about our fathers, that we have shared this wonderful memory before, and I'm deeply appreciative for you and for Senator Schumer for your leadership. And I want to say thank you to all of the members of the House and the Senate. You've already been asked once to stand up, so I won't make you do it again, but if we could have a round of applause for all of the wonderful members of the House and the Senate who are here. Finally, a really heartfelt and personal thank you from me to all of the staff of J Street who have made this an incredible conference. I'm going to say Courtney Rohrbach's name out loud, who has been the organizer of our last 4 conferences. This is her last day at J Street, and she organized this conference, and tomorrow is her last day with us. And thank you, Courtney, for everything that you do. By the final night of a 3-day conference and by 9:30 on the evening of a gala dinner, everything that needs to be said has been said, I promise you. I'll acknowledge that some of us may have missed a few of the words along the way as we were checking World Series scores on our phones. Not me. But I'll limit myself tonight to conveying one key message. And that's around J Street's role and importance as the prospects for reaching a 2-state solution in the near future grow ever dimmer. We started this organization a decade ago in 2008. We started it as people who care so deeply about the future of the state of Israel, the values that Steve talked about, that we hold in our hearts, in our hope for a safe and a secure Israel that will be democratic and Jewish, living side by side in peace next to a state of Palestine. We launched only months after talks between Prime Minister Ehud Olmert at the time and President Mahmoud Abbas had nearly reached a conflict-ending agreement. As a new president took office, I was quoted as saying, J Street's role was to be the blocking back for a president quarterbacking an effort to push the 2-state solution over the goal line. How far away that moment feels today. The forces promoting 2 states are no longer on offense. We are playing defense. And the tough question for J Street at this moment in history, from our critics as well as from our friends, is what the heck is your organization doing if the fundamental goal you set out to achieve seems so out of reach for the foreseeable future? So here is my answer. Every day, shockingly, it seems like every day, there are vital battles taking place in Congress, the media, and in our communities about Israel and the Middle East. And the further that a 2-state solution slips away, the more those battles heat up. So paradoxically, the importance of our pro-Israel, pro-peace voice rises as the odds of 2 states dim. What binds our movement and our community together isn't the belief in a policy outcome, one solution or another. It's our values. We've heard that over and over in this conference. It's our values and it's our beliefs, grounded in the ethics that our ancestors forged from the hard lessons of their own oppression. A people who has suffered expulsions, Inquisition, pogroms, Holocaust, and modern-day anti-Semitism must speak out powerfully against prejudice, racism, hatred, and yes, against occupation. The most important time to join us and support our work isn't when a two-state solution feels like it's just around the corner. It's now, when it's slipping away, and the forces of oppression and bigotry are on the rise, and our democratic and Jewish values are at risk. That's why I am so grateful to all of you for being with us tonight and over these past 3 days, for your support for J Street. And I ask you tonight to continue on the road with us, to keep your passion rising, to keep your engagement with us as we rise to meet the challenges of the Trump and Netanyahu eras, and as we create what I firmly believe can be a great progressive era in the 2020s. Thank you so much for being here this evening. And now, I would like to bring to the stage, for the final part of our program, this evening's conversants in our post-dinner conversation. You will find their bios in the program, so I'm not going to waste your time in introducing them, but please join me in welcoming to the stage our good friends, Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal from Washington, and the new editor-in-chief of The Forward, Jody Ruderin.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you all for staying awake or staying with us. When Jeremy asked me to moderate this conversation, I said, really, we're going to have a conversation at the Gala? And now I think this must be some kind of hazing ritual for the new girl, because I've been on this job for about 6 weeks. But I'm really thrilled to be here with you. And I want to start the conversation with really a personal question. I feel like one of the things that's happened at the conference is that there are a lot of Israelis and Palestinians here who have really tried to bring the policy issues to a human level and to a ground level. And both of you have traveled recently to the region. And I'd just love you to tell us a little bit about, starting with you, Congresswoman, you went on a J Street trip, I think, last year. And maybe you can tell us, and I know, Senator, that you just were in Jerusalem with Lindsey Graham, your Republican colleague, I think just a couple months ago. So I'd love you to just talk about what you've done in the region, how often you've visited, and maybe just share one personal memory of something that really stuck with you and that plays back in your head as you consider the policy issues around Israel and Palestine.
Well, thank you for the question, and hello, J Street. I'm so thrilled to be with you. And to be with the Senator and Jeremy, thank you so much for everything that you have done. You've been such a stalwart friend and ally and advisor on so many issues. And for me, I had never been to the region when I came into Congress in 2017. My experience with this issue comes mostly from two things: being a human rights activist my whole life, but also my child. Their grandfather came over on one of the last boats from Germany, was Jewish, was persecuted. It was 1942, and my child's great-grandmother died in a concentration camp. And so what I knew was from that experience. And so when I came to Congress, and we have the opportunity to go on a number of different kinds of trips, I chose to go on the J Street trip. And Jeremy didn't tell me that I was going to be the only member of Congress on this trip. In fact, I think there were supposed to be like 7 of us or 12 of us, and as it happened, it was just me and a wonderful group of J Street board members and activists and advocates. And it was life-changing. I really did not, I knew some of the history, I had seen some of the maps, but I really think until you're in the region, it's hard to understand what everything is. And it was such a combination of history, talking directly to many different kinds of people, traveling through the region, and seeing both the wonderful things, but also the really, the horrors. And so for me, probably there were two experiences that really stand out. One was being in Hebron and talking to people there who described climbing out their back window, not being able to walk on the streets, just seeing the numbers of military police relative to the population, and imagining this vibrant place, this vibrant marketplace, vibrant city that now is not that. And then the other was, we were there right during the time when Khan al-Ahmar was about to be razed. And so we went to Khan al-Ahmar, and the bulldozers were going to come in that day or the next day. In fact, there were some there, and I think it had just been stayed by the courts. And we sat with the village headman, and we listened to all of the villagers of that village talk about their long journey to get to that place, being kicked out from one place to another, and then finally settling there. We saw the school that had been built with rubber tires, and we saw these kids who were going to be moved again, and really had tried to build a life there with no water, no resources. And it was absolutely heartbreaking, but also incredible just to see the resilience of the people. And that has stayed, both those experiences have stayed with me and really guided my thinking around this whole issue.
Thank you for that.
Right. Well, let me also start by thanking J Street and Jeremy, and it's great to be here with all of you. I've been to Israel 3 times. The first time I traveled to Israel was in the 1990s. I was a member of the Maryland General Assembly. I went with the local Jewish Community Relations group and had an amazing time both in Israel and visiting the West Bank. And, I'd always been in love with the idea of Israel as a place and a homeland for the Jewish people. But there you could feel what was happening and truly fall in love with the country and the spirit of the country. My most recent time I went back was this past July. Yes, I did go with Senator Lindsey Graham. We disagree on 99.9% of things, but we had a good trip. We went on to other places. And again, deep affection for Israel and all that it's accomplished and our commitment to Israel's security. But what I took away from this trip, in addition to meeting with officials at all levels, including the Prime Minister, was a conversation I had with an Israeli soldier who was, of course, deeply committed to Israel, but talked very passionately about the experience that he had in the West Bank as part of the occupation, and was feeling very emotional, not only about the impact of the occupation on Palestinians, but was also asking himself the question, what's this doing to me and other Israelis, Jews? And that was a powerful takeaway from somebody who had committed his time and service to his country. And so I think that tonight we may have a conversation about how to reconcile and address all those important issues and emotions.
Absolutely. Thank you. One of the things that there's been a lot of talk about at this convention is the question of whether the United States military aid to Israel should have any conditions or strings attached to it. The Pod Save America guys asked all the 5 presidential candidates, and they had differing views, and some of them didn't really answer the question. And I think, which is par for the course. I think this is, a place where there may be some division between you. Congresswoman, you have supported the bill, the McCollum bill, that would condition some of the aid, say it shouldn't be used for Israeli detention of Palestinian children. And I know, Senator, you are a very strong supporter of military aid, although you've also said in a recent op-ed that military aid is not enough to keep Israel secure, and you are also a very strong critic of Netanyahu's proposal to annex the Jordan Valley. So I wonder, maybe starting with you, sure, how do you square all of that? And would you, if Netanyahu were to annex the West Bank, do you think that is an occasion to make the aid conditional, that it not be used for that, or that be a sanction?
So let's start with first principles and what brings everybody in this room together, which is that the only way to secure a Jewish democratic state that observes the human rights of all its people, and to make sure we fulfill the aspirations of the Palestinian people for self-determination, is a two-state solution. So let's just start with first principles. But it's not enough just to say it. We obviously have to find ways to make sure that we use our influence and leverage in a way to make that more likely. And we all recognize that, given the drift, we're really at a point where it's not likely to happen right now, but we need to preserve the option of a two-state solution, which all of us know is already close to vanishing. So my view is that the United States and Israel have many dimensions to their relationship: the military dimension, trade dimension, technology agreements. And I would not jump to saying we're not going to provide military aid, because my view is that Israel needs important military aid to secure its place in a very rough neighborhood. But what we do need to do, as Netanyahu and Trump try to erase the Green Line, as they try to essentially have expanding settlements and either de facto annexation or legal annexation, we need to use this leverage. And I believe that the European Union actually has the right overall approach, because they are aimed directly at this issue, which is distinguishing between the state of Israel and the West Bank and the occupied territories. And they do it through a policy called differentiation. And we need to make sure that we are not doing anything to aid or abet the expansion or the existence of settlements. We need to raise the costs of settlements. And there are a number of tools to do it. We use some very limited tools right now. We have certain labeling requirements, but the reality is that a lot of the bilateral relations between the United States and Israel do not distinguish in any way between our support in interaction with the state of Israel and our support in interaction with the territories. And by doing that, we're actually subsidizing, we're aiding and abetting what's happening. So I think while you have Netanyahu and Trump trying to erase the Green Line, we need, through our actions and policies, to make sure there's a bright line there in order to preserve the option of a two-state solution.
Congresswoman, can you expand on that and talk about how you would condition dollars aid, as well as how you might try to brighten up the Green Line, as the senator put it?
I agree with much of what the senator has said. I guess I would just say that this is an evolving situation, and it is evolving in part because of the actors, both the Trump administration, the Netanyahu regime, and the actions that have been occurring in a region that is really very explosive in many different ways. And I think if you think about aid, and you think about the ways in which the United States uses aid with every other partner in the world, by the way, Israel being, for important reasons, one of the largest recipients of our aid, we have to be able to make sure that our values are consistent across those different relationships that we have, and aid is a big tool in that. One of the biggest principles for me in the United States and our aid has to be around human rights and democracy. You cannot and we have exceptions to this in different ways. We struggle with this in different ways. I have spoken out against some of the human rights abuses that I see happening right now in Kashmir, in my own birth country. So I'm consistent about this. But I do think that we have to recognize that the topic of aid is a huge leverage point for the United States, and that we cannot allow our aid to be used to advance undemocratic, even racist principles that are being perpetrated. And I don't have specific ways that I would want to condition, because I think this is a complicated question. And even from just last year, when I was in Israel and the occupied territory, this discussion was not where it is today. It was a very different discussion even just 18 months ago. So this is moving very, very quickly, and we have to be clear that part of the reason it's moving that way is because of what the Trump administration has allowed to happen, condoned in happening, and what the Netanyahu government has been actively promoting. So I feel like the United States is getting very clear, most of us in the United States are getting very clear signals that we need to step up, and we need to make very strong statements against the occupation. We need to make very strong statements against human rights abuses that are happening. And as we heard in the very excellent speech right before we came out here, we need to recognize that this is not anti-Semitic for us to question an important ally's perspective on these big truths and values that are part of who we are as a country. Those two things have to be able to come together. And so I think that's where we are now, is in that process of sorting that out.
I want to pick up on a bunch of things that you just said. So starting with the shift that you just described, and I'm going to actually ask the senator to pick up on it because he's sort of been in elected Washington longer. I wonder, that J Street was found. I don't want to sound like a shill for J Street. I don't work for them. But it is kind of remarkable to see the change since this organization was started in the parameters of the debate around this issue. And I wonder if you can talk about, they're going to use that in their ad now. I'm going to be totally screwed. But anyway, but actually my question is, Senator, if you could help us think through what the factors really are. Congresswoman Jayapal just talked about the way that the Trump and Netanyahu administrations maybe have somehow moved the ball. But if you could first talk a little bit about what you see as the shift, what is sort of permissible or acceptable for a Democrat to say today that maybe wasn't when you were first elected in a district that had a lot of Israel activity in it, and why? Why do you think the debate has moved? Is this mostly about an education, or is it something else?
Well, first of all, I think J Street has played a very important role in the conversation that we're having in the United States Congress. And I do remember going to an early J Street meeting where I think you could fit everybody in an old-fashioned phone booth. So it is important that we've seen this growth in grassroots effort. If you look at J Street's history, it has coincided with two other things. One is a very hard right turn within Israeli politics, mostly reflected recently in the Netanyahu's government and its reliance on a coalition partnership with far-right parties, including the far-right religious parties and the settler parties, which has driven the policy of the government in Israel way to the right, so far as that in round number one, they talked about forming a coalition or enhancing their election coalition with a racist, party, successor to the Kahani party, and of course, then the statements came about with respect to annexation. And then here at home, of course, with the Trump administration, we've had an administration that thinks that by strangling the Palestinians economically, you're somehow going to drive them to give up their political and human rights, which isn't going to happen, and an administration that has essentially said to the current government of Israel, we're going to give you everything you want, concessions without anything in return. And so what I would argue is that everyone in this room has remained actually pretty steadfast in their principles: support for Israel, support for a secure Israel, support for a two-state solution. And what we've seen is the politics of this government in Israel and the politics here at home move so far out of the right that what we're talking here has been the bipartisan mainstream if you go back to, the last 20 years. And so our challenge is, number one, to recover that ground, and it's going to be very difficult, but then to recognize that because of the policies of the Netanyahu government and the Trump administration, they have further eliminated that green line. And so we're going to have to work even harder if we're going to preserve a two-state solution and a democratic Israel. So that is why we have to make it absolutely clear that not only would unilateral annexation be absolutely unacceptable, that we will never recognize those areas as part of the state of Israel, and that we will take actions, policy actions, to make it clear that we do not recognize any areas that are annexed. And we need to raise the price of settlement expansion in places like E1 and E2. And again, I go back to the differentiation strategy. There are a whole variety of levels you can use to achieve those goals, but that has to be our purpose here. But I think the politics has changed. We've actually had an administration that's actually taken us many, many steps backwards, tried to break the peace process. We shouldn't underestimate the amount of ground we have to recover in order just to get back to where we need to go. And in the meantime, we have to preserve the option for a two-state solution. That's our responsibility for all of us who believe that's the only way to have a Jewish and democratic Israel living side by side with Palestinians. That has to be our goal.
One other big issue, I think, or one other big piece of the shift, and that is young people. And I think if you look at the demographic changes across the country, I see you, I feel you, I love you. If you look at the demographic shifts, and definitely there, you can see some partisan shifts in there, but I think if you really dive into the numbers, there is a big disparity in the generational attitudes as well. And I think that many of our young people come with the core value of human rights, and that's how they see foreign policy. We have more young people that have traveled and have a passport than any other generation. We have more young people who are going and living in Israel, in Palestine, in other countries around the world, and they see things through the lens of human rights. And I think that that has also been a very important part of shifting the discussion, because I think there's a willingness to have some conversations that perhaps weren't really seen as appropriate before. And I think J Street, we're all going to be accused of being shills for J Street, but I do think J Street has created a lot of space for a different kind of conversation. Because I'll tell you, I was an activist for 2 decades before I came to Congress, and I think that there is a divide between how Congress and the media and the punditry approach Israel and Palestine, and then what the rest of the country thinks about it and what they know about it. And so I see that all the time, that there are things being done here to politicize and make partisan the issue of anti-Semitism, Israel-Palestine in general, and the rest of the country doesn't necessarily see it that way. In fact, they're not even talking about these issues other than anti-Semitism, which I think the entire country is and must be talking about so that we really attack that at its root. So I think we're in a new time, and the senator and I were talking backstage, and I was saying, one of the challenges for us, I think, is how we preserve hope, but make sure it's not false hope. And I think that there are some very real challenges right now with the occupation and the specific line. I remember when we drove through occupied territory, and and we had a wonderful gentleman that I can't remember his name, but he showed us on a map how strategic the settlements are. and how clearly it divides that occupied region, so that it makes it very difficult to think about 600,000 people that are now in that occupied region, settlers who will have to leave if there's really to be some sort of a true two-state solution, or there's got to be some other way to create this. And so that is, I think, a real challenge for us to preserve that hope and preserve that space, but recognize that we are coming up against people's recognition about the challenges of actually getting there.
So the young people in this room, many of the J Street U leaders, and the ones who've gone out to party at the bars in Washington because they thought that would be more fun than coming to the gala, they are doing a campaign. One of their pointed campaigns is about putting the word occupation into the Democratic Party platform in 2020. Both of you have used the word occupied territories, used the word occupation. The State Department used to use that word. I wonder how you feel about this proposal to put it in the platform, and then we'll open up and talk a little bit more about 2020 after you each answer that. Sounds like you're game.
I think it's
you're
essential.
signing on.
I think it's essential. I think we have to take it on. We have to take it on strongly.
Senator?
So my view is if you look at the Democratic platform, you're going to have to look at it in its totality. So let me just make it clear how we get to where you got, okay? I mean, number one, I believe it's important that we reaffirm our strong support for Israel and its security. Number two, I believe we make it very clear that we're for a two-state solution and why we're for a two-state solution, because it's the only way to preserve a Jewish democratic state and give Palestinians their legitimate rights. And in order to do that and preserve the option, we need to make it very clear, I think, in the platform that we will oppose any expansion of settlements and that we do support negotiations to end the occupation. So it all depends on how you phrase this. And again, my goal is to achieve the result that we all want. And I do believe that that's the way to frame the Democratic platform. I don't think it's just one word here or one word there, but if you put this in context and, again, emphasize it's not just a statement about a two-state solution, that's not enough. We have to indicate that we're willing to make tough choices in order to accomplish that. That's the key to this. And I should just say that, in my view, that is the pro-Israel position. And, you know, in order to be pro-Israel, it doesn't require us to support the policies of the Netanyahu government any more than being pro-American requires us to be in favor of President Trump's policies. And we need to be very clear about what the pro-Israel position is for people who are taking the long view.
I completely agree with what the senator said. I would just say I think it has to be the last piece that you got to, I think, has to be a strong condemnation of the occupation and annexation. I think it can't be, needs to be.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the 2020 framing of the campaign as a whole. I think we have here the only two Democrats who are not running for president in 2020. So I'm going to ask you to.
He hasn't announced yet.
Yeah.
And I can't, because of the small thing called the Constitution, though if the president's not really paying attention, maybe, you know, I should run for president as well. But
because you weren't born here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, good. You're going to be perfectly objective in this. So, we've been here and we've heard from 5 different candidates over the last 2 days. They were about as critical of Netanyahu as they are of Trump. They were very critical, calling him a racist and an authoritarian, very critical of the situation in Gaza, and a lot of them also said they would be open to conditioning aid. And at a panel yesterday, there was some interesting talk about kind of whether Jews are really up for grabs in this election, whether talking about Israel in a more progressive or critical way might push Jews over to Trump's camp. And I guess I just wonder, and there was some caution. I think, Randy Weingarten talked about the importance of, for if you want a Democrat to win in this election, that, this is going to be a general election where it's really going to be about some moving people who voted for Trump last time over, and what activists you had to be wary of alienating. And she is a veteran of many elections. So I guess I wonder whether you're concerned that Israel can become a wedge issue in this election and can potentially drive people who you would like to win over to the other side, and how you think Democrats really should approach this issue in the campaign.
Everything I have seen, looked at, the fundamental Jewish values around so many issues that are core to the Democratic Party, everything from immigration and refugee resettlement and the tremendous work that the Jewish social services, safety net organizations do. I think there is so much that binds the American Jewish community to the Democratic Party, and I think that we have to trust that relationship. I do think we have to be careful, of course, about the ways that we frame things so that we don't allow the Trump administration or Republicans who do not condemn anti-Semites in their own party to use that to try to somehow say that, Jewish folks who vote for Democrats are disloyal. It's just outrageous. And I think that has more possibility of turning Jews against the Republican Party. And I feel very solid in our, restating all the things that the senator said, the importance of a two-state solution, the importance of a secure Israel and a secure Palestine with human dignity and self-determination for all of those people, and our core American values. That's what binds us together as a people, and I believe that Jewish Americans are just as furious about what Trump is doing as we are.
So I agree with what the Congresswoman said. I think that if you look, and I agree with it not just based on the Jewish community's historical support for common values and important issues of human rights and civil rights, but even on the question of Israel, while it's no doubt that Trump will try and politicize it, they've tried in the United States Congress, Mitch McConnell has tried to do it, but our relationship with Israel is based not just on strategic interests, it's based on these values. And what brings everybody in this room together, and the reason there's support here for the principle of a two-state solution, is everyone in this room recognizes that's the only way we can move forward and guarantee Jewish values and the values that are important to the principles of this country. Because if you don't have a Jewish democratic state and you try to have one state of Israel, I will tell you, between 1990 and the last time I went there in July, in 1990s I did not have Israelis and Jews talking about how it could become an apartheid state. This time I heard that from people on the ground. And yes. So let's talk about values. The values that are reflected in the position of people in this room, in my view, are the values of the country and the values of the overwhelming majority of the Jewish community as well. So if you want to have a conversation about values, I think we're on strong ground. I would just say, with respect to anti-Semitism, we all know it's real. We all know it's dangerous. We are here on the one-year anniversary of the terrible shootings, and it is really important as we have these conversations that we do call out anti-Semitism wherever it is, that we stop the rise of these, white supremacists and neo-Nazi groups, but we call it out no matter where it is. But it will cheapen and degrade what it means to be anti-Semitic if people try to equate that with legitimate disagreements over the policies of the government of Israel and the Trump administration. So we should be very clear on all this as we move forward.
Just one more question. We heard Senator Schumer particularly talk over and over again about that Israel needed to be a bipartisan issue. But I don't think we had a lot of Republicans here at this convention. And I wonder, and just as we talk about the accusations of anti-Semitism, and I know as the head of the Progressive Caucus, you've been facing this in particular, I think, as some of your members have been really targeted with this accusation. And you both have come out strongly against the anti-BDS laws as a free speech issue. I guess I just we don't have much time left, but if you could just talk a little bit about, have we lost the bipartisan consensus around Israel? Are you worried about that there's no way, that they were too polarized on this issue? And what do you think might be the route back?
So as I said, I think in answer to your first question, or maybe the second question, I think most people in this room have been in the same place on these issues for the last 10 to 15 years. I know I have. A stable, vibrant, secure Israel, a two-state solution which had been bipartisan for many years, officially during Bush II administration. And that has been the goal of U.S. policy for all those years. And what's happened, the goalposts have been changed from the right-wing politics in Israel and the Trump administration. So when you say bipartisan, I would welcome my Republican colleagues to come back to where they were just 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, I remember Secretary Condoleezza Rice saying to the government of Israel, there will be severe consequences if you develop the area of E1. It's not going to happen. I remember others saying that we're going to, withhold some of our loan guarantees. So other administrations, Republican and Democratic alike, have been willing to use some of the leverage of U.S. policy. But so what's changed here, let's make no mistake, is Republicans have taken this conversation way off the rails following the rightward, hard right drift of the Netanyahu government. And so we're going to have to try and bring our Republican colleagues back. And again, the way to bring them back, I believe, is I do believe a majority of the Jewish community, or majority of the country, does understand and believes that a two-state solution is the only way to accomplish our values. It's the only way to make sure that we have our values reflected and respect the human rights of everybody, respect the democratic rights of everybody, and also preserve a Jewish democratic state. And so let's try and bring our Republican partners back. It won't be that easy. I will say, I mentioned at the beginning, I was in Jerusalem with Senator Lindsey Graham. I don't want to get him in trouble. We had a press conference where both of us called for a two-state solution. Again, because he recognizes, like people in this room on this one issue, that is the only long-term viable way forward for both the Jewish people, Israel, and the Palestinians.
Congresswoman, a brief last word. I know it's late.
Yeah, very briefly, I'll just say that at the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and we are 100 members, 40% of the entire Democratic caucus, we have been working very, very hard to bring Alan Lowenthal's two-state solution bill to the floor for a vote, because I think, again, it allows us to say to our Republican colleagues, this is a position you have taken, we have taken together, and we would like you to take it again, because it is important to do so. And so I think that this is one of the things that we are trying to do. But I think, also, this is a time of churn, and our members are reeling from some of the things that are leveled at them. And I think that we all have to just really take a breath and try to create as much space, as much generosity and abundance as possible, and recognize that we have the beauty of the Democratic Party is we have a very diverse party. I am the first South Asian American woman ever to serve in the House of Representatives. And it is a wonderful thing that we have our first 2 Muslim American women, our first 2 Native American women. And what that means is that when you expand the table, it doesn't mean we just sit there and look pretty. It means we say what we think and we bring our experiences to bear and we get better policy out of it at the end of the day, because the best policy is the policy that reflects the entirety of the American people and its diversity. And so I'm just grateful to be in that with J Street, grateful to all of the people in the room who have really been trying to preserve that space. I didn't come into a place that was bipartisan, unfortunately. I was elected when Donald Trump was elected. So the only experience I've had is the one that I have right now, and yet, as an organizer and an activist, I believe that something much, much better is possible. That's why we're all here, and I'm grateful to J Street for that.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, everybody here.
Thank you to everyone here who stayed. I know it's past my bedtime. Thank you to J Street and to Jeremy. And good night, everyone. This is the end of the gala.
Thanks, Jody.
All right.